Now let's speak to the woman who leads their official opposition, Ruth Davidson, who has been leading the Conservative Party in Scotland since 2011. You may have seen her in the newspapers. She was the Hollywood Dog of the Year competition this week. She comes across as a friendly, approachable politician, but she's not to be underestimated. Under her stewardship, the Conservatives have become the official opposition in Holyrood. They also did very well in the local elections in Scotland on Friday. Newspaper headlines yesterday suggested the Conservative strategists think they could win as many as 15 seats in Scotland. I spoke to her yesterday, and she began by telling me how they were making inroads against the SNP.
It's a lot to do with hard work. It's a lot to do with making sure that we listen to the people of Scotland and what their priorities are. And the very clear priorities from people in Scotland is that let's not be dragged and sucked back into talking about the Constitution all the time, dragged back to another divisive referendum. But let's sort out some of the things in Scotland that need to be better.
Well,
things like our schools need to be better, our economy needs to work better. So it's about making sure we don't use up all the bandwidth of politics, just clashing on the Constitution, and actually do the things that matter to people's lives.
I'm happy you brought that up, because I was going to ask, are you obsessed with the question of independence for Scotland? And I ask this because Nicola Sturgeon highlighted a Conservative local election leaflet which mentioned her, the SNP or independence, a grand total, she said, of 43 times. There was nothing in it about, for instance, like you just said, education, which you think would be important in local elections. Are you actually obsessed with independence as an issue?
Well, no, and there's a very easy way. If Nicola Sturgeon wants me to stop talking about independence, it's a dead easy way of doing it. She can stop demanding a second referendum. She can respect the result that we made as a country just 3 years ago, and she can respect the majority of the people of Scotland that don't want dragged back there. Now, she signed an agreement between the Scottish and UK governments to respect the referendum decision. She's clearly gone back on that, and the people of Scotland are looking for a champion that'll stand up to her. I'm happy to stand up to her, but I didn't get into politics to talk about the Constitution.
What's the Conservative flagship policy then in this general election for Scottish voters? What are you actually saying to them?
Well, we're going to be talking on a number of issues. So education, the economy and public services are the three main ones. In Scotland, I don't know if your listeners are aware, but we're only 1 quarter away from recession. The rest of the UK is growing at around 2% per year. In Scotland, we're stagnating and going backwards. And if you look at what's different in Scotland to the rest of the UK, that big constitutional question is part of that, because it means that companies aren't investing, they're not making decisions to expand their workforce. They've got a lot of things on hold. We believe there needs to be a wholesale reform of education in this country. The Scottish Government put a governance review and excuse me a wee second, just because you asked me what the priorities were, so I'm explaining them to you.
No, but the policy actually, not just the priorities. What's the policy, for instance, on education?
Well, so we want to have a review. We want to make sure that we empower our head teachers to make more decisions about recruitment in their schools. We want more pathways into teaching. We want to increase teacher numbers. We want to make sure that we have stringent testing in Scotland, so that at the moment the situation is that if you're a parent, you don't know until the age of 14 how your child is doing. We don't think that's acceptable. So lots and lots of policies in there.
In terms of the general election, then, I suppose every party kind of wants that Ed Balls moment, where you unseat a big beast. Your big beast, Alex Salmond, perhaps, been campaigning in his constituency. Do you believe you
can... It's not his constituency, he just happens to be the current MP.
OK. You take the point, though, to most people, was his constituency till he became a candidate like everybody else. Do you think you can unseat him, Ruth Davidson?
Well, we saw from the box returns at the local government election on Thursday that the Conservatives beat the SNP in first preference choices by more than 2,000 votes. Now, I fully accept that a local government election run along STV is different from a first past the post general election, that turnout was different and all of these other caveats. But we are absolutely in the hunt. We've got a great team in on the ground, and people will see us in Gordon, as they will do right across the rest of the country, leading Scotland's fight back against the SNP, and we're the only party in Scotland that's strong enough to do so.
Well, I'm sure the Labour Party have a different view of that, and I'll be talking to some of them in Scotland. But you don't need to take my word for that. You just need to look at the electoral returns in the last year or two. The Scottish Conservatives are much stronger than the Labour Party, and yes, there used to be, for many years, a Labour hegemony in Scotland, and they took the voters of Scotland for granted. We're not doing that. Alex Salmond has accused you of boasting and said you're going to be brought down back to earth with a bump, because people in his constituency up for grabs do not like that kind of boasting that they feel has gone on since the local election. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that Alex Salmond has probably got a PhD in boasting, so if he wants to talk about it, he's eminently qualified to do so. But what I've said to you today is what I'm saying everywhere. We know we have to work hard for every single vote.
Are you comfortable with your party, with the Conservative stance on Brexit? It's something you campaigned against. Are you happy with the mood music around this so far?
Well, you're right. I believe in wider unions. That's part of the reason I campaigned to keep Scotland in the United Kingdom and to keep the United Kingdom in the European Union. But I also believe in the democratic process of a referendum and respecting the result that people make. That's why, I made sure, or I'm trying to make sure, that we respect the results Scotland made in respect of the UK, yes, and the UK in respect of the European Union. What I want is the best Brexit deal for the UK as we leave, and that includes Scotland. And I think that there's an awful lot of people across Scotland who believe the same as me.
At the EU referendum debate in Wembley last year, you accused the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson of lying about the cost of Europe, Turkey and an EU army. You told the audience you deserved the truth. Do you think the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson still lies?
Well, look, I think in terms of the debate that we had on Brexit and some of the issues that are there, it's one of the things where the proof is going to be in the pudding. We'll very soon find out, whether Turkey is going to join, whether there will be a unified European army. I didn't believe at the time that there would be. I don't see any indication that there will be, but time will tell.
But in the sense of, I'm trying to understand, in your Conservative Party, those people who are now surrounding Theresa May were very prominent in the Leave camp. They were on the other side of the campaign, if you like, to you. Boris Johnson, David Davis, those sorts of people, Liam Fox, these are the people that this deal is now in the hands of. How do you feel now that many of these people are running your party and, at the moment, the country?
OK, Emma, there's, maybe 30 people that attend Cabinet, that are Cabinet Ministers, and you've just named 3. I don't think it's fair to say that Theresa May surrounds herself just with Brexiteers. I don't think it's accurate. I think that, yes, there was absolutely, and we made no bones about it, within the Conservative Party, just as within the country, there were some people that supported yes, and some people that supported no, some people that wanted to stay in, and some people that wanted to come out. That's exactly where the country is. The country made a decision that it wanted to leave, and now it's down to the government to make sure that they get the best deal possible.
Have you made up with Boris Johnson?
Boris and I get on very well. We have we work
where
we need to work
in terms of comments publicly. I'm not sure anyone else would feel like they could get on well with you after those comments saying he was lying.
Well, Boris Johnson and I had a very good meeting when he first became Foreign Secretary. We worked together in those areas of competency where it's shared.
Do you trust him not to lie in position of Foreign Secretary?
I trust any Foreign Secretary not to lie, because apart from anything else...
Any Foreign Secretary, even one you've accused of lying publicly about the promises when we Brexit?
Well, I think that saying that people deserve to hear the truth is not necessarily saying that you're taking a view on somebody's character. What I do believe that in the role of Foreign Secretary, you absolutely do need to deal with a straight bat. Otherwise, in terms of diplomacy, you're not going to get very far in future.
You said you trust any Foreign Secretary. This isn't just any Foreign Secretary. This is Boris Johnson, the same man.
No, absolutely.
That you were just
and as I say, we've had a very good clear-the-air meeting after that. We sit together in Cabinet. I absolutely trust that the Foreign Secretary will deal with a straight bat with our neighbours as we go forward. In fact, the job requires it, and including this Foreign Secretary, yes, absolutely.
In terms of immigration, a key part of the campaigning around Brexit, Theresa May has said that she wants to keep to that target that was in the Conservative manifesto in 2015. Should immigration be reduced to the tens of thousands to the UK?
Well, I think that's the system that the Prime Minister wants to take forward. It has endorsement, or it is being put forward for endorsement at this general election, and it's up for people to decide.
But what do you think? Because that could harm the Scottish economy, couldn't it?
Well, I think the big question in Scotland is why, when we've got a third of the landmass of the UK, we've got 8.4% of the population of the UK, why we only attract 4% of migrants to the UK to come and live and work in Scotland. Now, could it be because we're the highest tax part of the UK? Could it be because, our economy is much slower? We're only 1 quarter away from recession. Could it be because, our reputation for educational excellence is on the slide? I think these are big reasons why we're not attracting people who come to the UK to come and live and work in Scotland. And I think that's work that we've got to do in Scotland, and the Scottish Government has got to do, and the SNP has got to answer for, as to why we're not as attractive to some migrants coming here as the rest of the UK is.
But you're not going to get any more migrants if she achieves this goal for the UK as a whole.
Well, I'm saying in terms of the proportion, I think that we should absolutely be attracting more than 4% of the people that come to the UK. We should be attracting more of them to Scotland.
What figure would work, and what percentage do you want in Scotland?
Well, look, I want to make sure that we attract the brightest and best to Scotland. I want to make sure that we've got any skills gaps that we've got, we're able to fill both within our own population in terms of having a better education system here, but also if we need to bring people in from outside. But look, this is something that will be decided by the people of the UK. This is a clear goal that the Prime Minister's been put forward.
But they need to have information to decide it upon. They need to know what you believe on this in Scotland. So what's the level for you?
Well, for me, it's never been about numbers, and I think it's right that the Prime Minister hasn't said it's going to be 892 or whatever it is, but she's saying she wants to bring it to the tens of thousands. That's a pretty broad spectrum, and it's on the needs of the country between one year to the next.
But you want to see more. You want to see more immigration to Scotland.
What I'm saying is, I think it's wrong. That we have a system in Scotland, or we have an area of Scotland wherein we attract far fewer people that come to the whole UK.
How are you going to get more
to Scotland
if
than we currently have?
I don't get it. How are you going to get more if the overall number is being cut by the Prime Minister?
Well, what I'm saying is, you asked me the question about immigrant numbers to Scotland, people that wanting to settle here, and I say that yes, absolutely, we've got a problem in Scotland. And the problem in Scotland is the number of people coming to the UK who want to choose to settle in Scotland is far below the ratio than our population would suggest, our landmass would imply. And I think we've got to ask ourselves questions as to when people arrive in the UK, why it is they choose not to come and settle in Scotland.
Let's talk about something which has been another big cause of debate, specifically in Scotland, the rape clause. To remind people, it's a UK-wide policy limiting child tax credits to your first two children. One of the exceptions is if you've been raped, but it requires the victim to talk to a health professional who then fills out a form saying they've been raped. Are you comfortable defending the rape clause?
Well, I think that it's right that child tax credits are limited to the first two children. I also think that it's right that if you are going to have that limit, that you have exceptions in exceptional cases, including the very worst cases, like the one that you're referring to. In terms of how that works on the ground, if there are issues with that, then I'm completely open, if there are better ways of doing it, to reviewing that. But in terms of the system of having that... Well, what I'm saying is that in terms of the way it's been set out, having that third-party professional to fill out any of the areas for you and to help you with that and to support you with that, that's a system that is already in existence within the welfare system. It has cross-party support. It's used primarily for victims of domestic abuse. So it's a system that we know works in the past and has broad support. But if in this particular instance, with this particular exception to this 2-year-old piece of legislation that's being brought forward, then yes, if that needs to be reviewed, then let's review that. But it's not been brought in yet, so we have to see how it works. Sorry, what was the question?
You do want to review that?
No, what I'm saying is I believe that having the two-child restriction is right, but if you have a restriction, you've got to have exceptions to that in exceptional cases, particularly in the worst of circumstances like this. I think that's right too. But I'm saying is, if there is an issue, and we don't know yet because it's only just coming in, if there is an issue with how that's done, then let's review that. But so you think the system that's being brought in is one that already works elsewhere and has broad support elsewhere.
But this is a specific scenario. So just to clarify, you think it's wise to say that women would have to state that they've been raped, have to tick a box to claim the exemption?
No, what I've said is that if you have a two-child policy, you need to have an exemption for exceptional cases, like, for example, non-consensual sex. Now, I think that in terms of having and making sure that there's somebody there to help you do that, to do it on your behalf, then I think that's the way to go. That's definitely the way that it has worked in other areas.
It's been called cruel and barbaric by your opposition numbers in the Labour Party and the SNP. Why have they said that? How hard do you find this to defend?
Well, I think that's quite odd that you would say that, on the grounds that at the time that this passed, if you remember way back in 2015 when this was brought forward to the House of Commons, the Labour Party was being run, the interim leadership was Harriet Harman, who had such a problem with it that at the time she said that she was going to be understanding of the policy and also instructed her MPs to abstain, not vote against it. So it seems to me rather odd that 2 years later, after the Labour Party abstained rather than opposed, they're now in the middle of an election campaign saying that this is is something that is all of these different adjectives that you've used.
We are where we are. I'm trying to understand how you feel about it. And when you say once it's in place, then it can be reviewed, what exactly would you be reviewing?
Well, what I'm saying is if there are specific areas in terms of how it works that can be improved, if people want to bring forward suggestions, then of course I'm open to that.
So what do you say to people on the limiting of child tax credit to the first two children? What do you say to those who say this policy will lead to a big increase in child poverty? Doesn't it hurt the just about managing families that Theresa May says she's so keen to help?
Well, I think you've got to look at the welfare reforms in the round. We know that more people are in work than were when the coalition and then the Conservative government came to power. Actually, child poverty rates have reduced. Pensioner poverty rates have reduced. More people are on the furthest from work.
Hang on a minute.
So in terms of people that have been out of work for more than 2 years,
when you say child poverty
rates
rates have reduced, according to a Scottish government publication, 260,000 children in Scotland are living in poverty, which is 40,000 up on the last year.
Across the UK, now there are specific issues in Scotland.
In your backyard.
If you want me to talk about the Scottish Government's response of why £400 million per year of welfare benefits go unclaimed in Scotland, then I'm absolutely happy to tackle the SNP on their record in Scotland. But you were asking me about the
welfare's not
UK
devolved.
government. Well, I think then you've got to ask the questions of why, if across the UK child poverty is down, why specifically in Scotland do you say that it's up? You know, they're issues that the SNP have to answer for themselves. Yes, we have lower employment, for example, in Scotland than there are across the rest of the UK. So there's lots of different issues in there.
But is that not uncomfortable for you? Welfare not being devolved, that you have to defend UK welfare issues. The SNP then had to dig you out of a hole, as an example, on the bedroom tax by giving extra money to housing associations so it doesn't have to be enforced. Is that not an uncomfortable position for you to be in? That they have to spend. They have to spend money that is devolved to Scotland on getting people out of a bad place that the government in Westminster has put them in. Your government.
Well, no, I think that might be a very nice SNP press release that you've read out, but that's not the situation on the ground in Scotland. The situation in Scotland is that I supported, in fact, led some of the calls on the devolution of more powers to the Scottish Parliament. Now, that includes not only powers over welfare. So, for example, if the SNP did want to bring in, a large families supplement so that the two-child policy didn't apply, they're able to do that. But they're also able to raise taxation in order to pay for it. So, if there is something in Scotland wherein the Scottish Government decides, of whatever colour, that it wants to give more in some area, that is only relating to people in Scotland, then they have the ability to raise taxation to pay for it. So that's exactly what the UK government does on a UK-wide scale.
I don't understand
why broad taxation to pay for what it decides to be the welfare benefits of this country.
I don't understand why 260,000 children in Scotland are living in poverty, which is up 40,000 on the last year. Welfare is not devolved. What is the answer to that question?
Well, there are great swathes of welfare which are devolved. That's what I'm saying, as part of the last Scotland Act that was brought forward.
So you take no responsibility for this as a Conservative government?
No, not at all. I think there's so much work that needs to be done. You have an administration in Scotland that's not a Conservative administration, but that is choosing to make decisions themselves. Now, they're able to answer for that. I'm able to answer for my own party here. You then asked me about whether it was right that the Scottish Government used its money to do this. I said, no, they have taxation ability, so they could raise taxes if they want to pay for something extra that only applies to Scotland, then they can do that by taxing the people of Scotland extra. In fact, we do have differential in our tax rates here in Scotland. That's what devolution is all about. Now, if you're asking me about do we need to do more, then absolutely yes, we do. I want to make sure that we don't have a lower employment rate in Scotland than the rest of the UK, because I believe that the best way out of poverty is to be working and to have people in work in a household. These are elements that I absolutely am able to argue for and will be doing so at this election.
I'm trying to understand this overall picture then when we talk about welfare, because some people would put it, even though you're a hugely popular figure in Scotland, you're having to defend a government and you're part of a party where welfare reforms have hurt Scottish people. Are you trying to say then?
Wait a minute.
In terms of that,
got into work.
You did review my questions there and reviewed the answers that you gave me to get to this point. But what I'm trying to understand then, at that last bit where you just said there is more that we need to do, are you saying there should be higher taxes in Scotland to help people, to help with these welfare shortage?
What I'm saying is we need to get more people into work in Scotland. We need to have a more dynamic economy in Scotland. We need to have fewer workless households in Scotland. We need to make sure things like that we've done on a UK-wide basis, like bringing in the national living wage, does apply to Scotland. We want to make sure that fewer people at the lower end of the income scale have money taken out of their back pockets in taxation in Scotland, so they've got more money to be able to spend themselves. But you just made an assumption. You just said categorically that welfare reforms have hurt people in Scotland, and I was challenging that, because actually we see more people in work in Scotland. We see also that welfare reform, things like the benefit cap, have huge support across Scotland and have no difference in support in Scotland than they do in other parts of the UK.
So SNP should raise taxes to pay for this, but you wouldn't if you were in power in Scotland?
What I would do is I would make sure we've got a more dynamic economy, that we're able to increase, rather than the SNP having cut 150,000 college places. We would make sure we had people that were being trained beyond school age. There was more people in further and higher education. I'd make sure that there were more job opportunities, so there was a lower unemployment rate, so we had more people in work and more people able to work and to have an income which helps raise people out of poverty.
I've got to ask you, Ruth, would you consider a future in Westminster yourself?
I've got a pretty big job here, so I think I'm pretty happy in Edinburgh right now, thanks.
Ruth, it was very good to talk to you.
Fantastic, Emma. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.